marketing, explosive growth, and revolutionary secrets that can catapult your business to new heights. You're now listening to the Underground Marketer Podcast with your host, Tudor Dumitrescu, the one podcast devoted to showing new businesses how to market themselves for high growth.
Welcome to the Underground Marketer. This is the place where we deliver the real truth about marketing and explore big ideas that help new businesses thrive and grow into big ones. I'm your host, Tudor, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Alex Friedman. And Alex is a real underground marketer and entrepreneur. He has basically built a tutoring business from scratch. So it's my pleasure to introduce Alex to you. And Alex, why don't you say hi to our listeners and tell us briefly about yourself and how you got started?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alex. Hello, listeners. How I got started. So I was one of those entrepreneurs that I think didn't intend to start a business. I didn't think I would be a business owner. I started tutoring kind of for the hell of it because someone asked me to. And then little by little, I realized like, oh, hey, I could do this instead of a full-time job. And then a few years later, it was like, oh, hey, I can make an actual business out of it. And there was a whole long journey. So I'll let you lead the conversation through various parts of it.
Okay, that's really cool. So, I mean, you got the idea of starting in tutoring when you were working a job. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was working as a consultant. I was a programmer, and it was my first job that wasn't a full-time job. It was a part-time job. So I had a flexible schedule. And it was also the first time I realized like, oh, I don't have to be a full-time person. I can do things part-time on an hourly basis. So before that, I mean, it sounds so weird now, from my current perspective. Before that, I just didn't think it was possible. That sounds odd again, but I didn't realize like, oh yeah, you really could make hourly pay. It was amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's for a lot of people when they see that they can sort of make money independently for the first time, that tends to be a big thing. And a lot of gateways basically open from there. So how did this tutoring opportunity basically knock on your door?
So it came out kind of oddly. I was doing martial arts and the sensei, who was a friend of mine, had a kid, and the kid was a troublemaker, and she knew that I was a troublemaker and I was a high school dropout. And she was like, hey, why don't you tutor my kid? The last person to tutor him, he just thought the tutor wasn't smart enough, and I know you're smart and you're good at math. So he likes you and he respects you. So I started tutoring this boy. And it turned out, of course, like it was this had kind of a long range thing. So I tutored him for a while, and he was incredibly bright, but he wasn't interested in math. I was a math tutor. But he kind of got interested, and I kind of followed up over the years. And he did drop out of high school, and he did join a circus. This is real. Mm-hmm. But then he went back to college and started taking math classes. So I like to think I have a little bit of responsibility for that. And after I started tutoring him, I was like, oh, hey, this pays well. And this is really satisfying work. And I had never done work before that was directly satisfying in this way. So I decided, oh, let me see if I can make a business out of it. And that was hard. That part was hard after that.
That's really awesome. So, I mean, which part of it did you really like? I guess that it's the part that you're actually interacting with people more, because I suppose that in your previous job as a consultant / programmer, you didn't interact so much and you didn't really see the effects that your work basically had on one specific person.
That is exactly right. So I worked for, I guess, some semi-well-known companies. I worked for a company that does airfare searches. Used to be called IT software, but then they got bought by Google. I worked for companies that produce other stuff. And I worked, what else did I do? I worked as a research something or other. And yeah, you work on stuff, but it's hard to understand why. Like maybe there's some abstract satisfaction. You're solving a problem, but okay, so you save some guy somewhere. Maybe you don't really know $10 in his airplane ticket. Like, who cares? Mm-hmm. When you work with a person directly, it's satisfying on a much more primal level. Like, I really helped this person see themselves in a different way. It's not like I just taught them something. They're like, cool, I got it. Bye. It's like, oh, I changed this person's perspective of themselves. And I think like other people, like in other industries, get the same satisfaction. Like if you're a fitness coach and you see someone go from hey, I'm an unhealthy, like unathletic person, to just changing their self-perception to like, oh, I can be a healthy, fit person. It's very satisfying.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things, even for myself working in marketing and as a consultant. When I see the impact that it actually has in changing people's lives, that's definitely a big thing. It's a big motivator. And I think that actually entrepreneurs, when they first get started, and I mean, you didn't even see yourself as an entrepreneur initially, but I think that it's very useful if you learn to get your joy out of the value that you deliver, because that sort of motivates you to keep going. And I suppose that you didn't make a fortune just by tutoring this guy, right? And it was this motivation that actually impelled you to see how you can take this forward.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, he actually, it paid pretty well. I was like, oh, I can make the same tutoring a kid as I do doing programming. And I was like, well, I hate having I hate having a boss. I'm really bad at
Mm-hmm.
having at least I was then. And I thought like, well, how do I smelled freedom. I didn't really see it yet, but I smelled freedom. And I was like, how do I move towards freedom? So I was like, well, maybe I could tutor some other kids. And if I'm making $50 an hour, that was a lot of money in like 2008 for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that got me on that path of like, well, how do I keep this going?
Wow. So 2008, that's actually when the crisis, the economic crisis happened. And that's basically when you launched the business.
Yeah, I always thought that like if you provide a good service and it's something that people need, economic crisis isn't a big deal.
Mhm.
People. It's interesting because it just repeated the same thing during Corona, where lots of businesses closed, and I got very lucky that because I'm in education and specifically education for more like wealthy people, the last thing they're willing to stop spending money on is their kids.
Of course. Absolutely. And I mean, it's the thing that you have to be adaptable as a business. We'll probably get to the current phase and Corona later, because I think that's very instructive for a lot of people. But one thing that I think is essential, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to start your own business, you have to be willing to adapt to the market. And I mean, a lot of the big businesses, they do their best not to adapt. I don't know if you've noticed this when you worked a job in the past, but that's one of the things that personally I wouldn't like in a job, that they don't give you the freedom to expand, to develop new things, and they actually hold a lot of stuff back.
Yeah, I mean, when you're working for a company, the company has a mission, but then the individuals in them have their own goals and incentives. And I honestly have a hard
It
time
gets
understanding
political.
how anything works at all. And I haven't worked in a business since I was much younger and much stupider and really didn't understand what was going on. But it never made sense to me why anyone did anything. I just couldn't figure it out, and I still can't.
Yeah, I see. So, I mean, how old were you in 2008 when you first got into tutoring and you started building this up?
Let's see. Was it 2000? It may have actually been before 2008. I think I really made it into business by 2008. I got into it. Oh, when was it? 2006, 2007. I was, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, in my mid 20s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's very inspiring. I mean, it just shows that and really you found the need, or I should say that the
Both
need
into it.
found you, more
Yeah.
like it. So that's kind of fascinating. So how did you go from having this one single client basically to finding new client? I mean, what was the first thing? Because, a lot of people ask the question, how do I get started from scratch? Like, I don't have anything, I don't know where my customers are. I don't know anything. I've never studied marketing. And I suppose you're in sort of a similar position. So how did you approach this?
I was in a similar position, but I think I was in a much worse position than basically anyone now because there wasn't a wealth of information about how to start a small business. Like the only thing that existed was, what was it like? This guy who traveled and he had some ideas about it, but there's so much information now. But I'll tell you what I did, and it won't have much bearing on what people do. So I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea. I never thought of myself as a business owner or that I'm marketing a business to begin with. I was just like, how do I find people? So like I asked my grandma, like, what do I do? And she's like, well, there's a building with lots of Russian people. Go post a flyer. So I was like, okay, how do I make a flyer? I have no artistic design skills. So like little by little, I was like, okay, let me learn how to make a flyer. Okay, how do I print a flyer? Like, these are all things that seem like they shouldn't be a problem, but they really are. So I went to the nearby big buildings, posted flyers, and like someone actually called me. It was amazing. In retrospect, it was the worst thing to do. Like there's like no benefit to what I did because it was like the wrong customers. It was like low income Russian people who don't tend to pay for tutoring.
Yeah.
It was like the wrong neighborhood. It was the wrong method. It was all wrong. But that was step one. And then eventually I was like, well, I guess I have to make a website. And I forget how I got the idea. Probably some marketing guru sold me some sort of nonsense for like $2.99.
I see.
And I was like, I guess I have to make a website. And eventually I was like, how do I make a website? Well, there was WordPress, thankfully. So I made this like WordPress website. I was like, what do I call this business? I don't even know. And I'm like, okay, there's Google, search engine optimization. Like, well, I'm in Brooklyn and I'm a math tutor. So I'm just going to call it Brooklyn Math Tutor because, hopefully that does it. And somehow, because this was 2008, I think that's when I started as a company, Brooklyn wasn't quite as cool yet. So these things weren't taken yet. And in retrospect, it turned out to be a good choice. But of course, starting the website didn't help. Like one, I didn't know how to make it look good. So like, oh, how do I find a nice theme? How do I write? I hated writing. Like I'm a math guy. And the worst thing I was the worst writer.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is for your listeners, right? Since you do copywriting, what I've come to see like over all this time is that the most valuable and useful skill for anyone is copywriting. Like there's nothing more valuable than being able how to write and perhaps now write and then speak well on camera, but really writing. So I had to learn how to write. I had to like post content because I didn't know what else to do. I had to try to learn search engine optimization, like some basics of it. I was like lost in the woods, with trying to find the light. It took a long time.
Mm-hmm. And it's really the process, I think, when you're lost in the woods, because a lot of people, they're looking for that system, step by step. What do I do? How do I make it work? And they want basically something that's step by step and they will just follow the steps and they will get the result. But of course, as you noticed, that's not how it actually works. You have to try a lot of things. Like you tried first with the flyer in the building, then with the website and so on. And you have to keep iterating to actually get to something that works. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. How do you feel that you were, because you mentioned copywriting, right? And you mentioned how it turned out to be one of the most valuable skills that you learned. And I sort of agree with that. I think that at a larger scale, communication really is supremely valuable because you need it for leadership, you need it to create teams, you need it to get your ideas out there, you need it to market, to hire people, to talk with investors, maybe depending what kind of business you have. So I think that that's definitely one side of it. But another side of it that I see as important is the mindset. So I wanted to dig into this a little bit. How were you in terms of mindset in the beginning? And how did you develop and how did you find that it actually affected your business?
Oh man, that's such a big thing. And it's very interesting because it's not really mindset. I mean, mindset is just part of it, but just like my maturity and general like life skills and communication skills. Right. It's not copywriting per se. It's communication, and written communication was one of them. I was a terrible communicator because I come from Soviet Union. And I think we talked about this before. Like in the Soviet Union, people don't have feelings, or at least we treat each other like we don't have feelings. We're overly direct. We don't read any nuance. We don't know how to deal with people who have any kind of sensitivities. It's like, what? No, you stupid. What you talking about? So I think I was particularly bad at it in some way. What I was good at talking to kids because I had this odd thing where I kind of treated everybody at the same social level as me, which kids like because I don't treat them like kids, but adults didn't like. And the parents, my clients were older than me. So I wasn't really good at talking to them at all. So it took me, years to even realize this was a problem. Like forget about solving it. Like first you have to know that this is a problem and then know that this is fixable. And that was like, I think some of the biggest changes I went through is like realizing how many of the difficulties in my life, and of course, this wasn't just business. This was like my personal relationships with my family, relationships, etc., friends, girlfriends, everything. How much of it is drastically affected to the extent that it's impossible to imagine until you really understand it by like communication skills, empathy, like just like how much nonsense you have in your mind, like how clearly you think, how much you can understand other people. So, I mean, that's like, I could write a book about it, but it was a huge change. And as I got older and worked on this, things in my business went much, 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 much better, of course, because I could talk to people better. I was better able to just, I wouldn't say negotiate, but like negotiate situations, navigate situations, talk to people. In my 20s, I didn't know how to talk to customers at all, because these people who were like, these kind of like well-off people in their like late 30s, early 40s. And then I started seeing, as I got older, I was like, oh, hey, these people actually like started to see me as an adult. And I guess I am an adult. And then as I got older still, I realized, I'm not actually the best person for this job.
I see.
The whole, yeah.
And that's sort of probably how you got into hiring people, right?
That's how I got into hiring, getting a manager. I first had to like get tutors. And this was like a big mindset shift too, going from freelancer to business owner. And I was like so reluctant because I didn't want to be a business owner. I don't know why. Like looking back, like what kind of moron was I? But I didn't want to be a business owner. I thought it was for like weird people. And so when I first came to hiring tutors, I was really clueless about how, just like looking back, I didn't really know how to talk to people. I didn't know what to filter for. I did know how to tell if somebody was good at math, but that was it. And as it turns out, that's like such a basic thing. And you need much more than just, I could do this job. Like, will you show up on time? Are you nice? Are you reliable? Are you there's so much. And I got much better at that over time. And I could talk about the like our hiring process, how that like changed drastically as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. One thing, going back slightly to the mindset thing, a lot of people when they start out, they deal with fear, like they're not sure if this is going to work out, and that sort of holds them back. They don't know how to navigate that sort of fear and anxiety. Like, for example, when you decided to put flyers out there, a lot of people wouldn't even have taken that sort of action just because they would not feel comfortable with it. So I wanted to ask you how you felt in terms of that, and if you've dealt with fear, and how did you basically navigate it at the beginning? Because there's a lot of uncertainty in there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's hard to go back. There was definitely, I don't remember if I had fear that things don't work out. One of the ways I think to deal with some of these fears is to create situations where like the failure mode isn't catastrophic. So a tutoring company, you don't invest really much money. You kind of invest hustle. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I did have a huge fear of investing money into things, like coming from like, immigrant family. It was incredibly hard for me to say, I'm going to post these flyers. I don't know how much it's going to cost me some money. And I don't know if I'm going to have any return. That was hard. And that's something I kind of like slowly worked on. I didn't have much social fear because I was too socially inept at the time. I wasn't concerned like, what if people catch me posting flyers? And I kind of assumed most things won't work. And I think that's kind of a good way to go into things. It's like you're just trying stuff out.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't have an expectation necessarily that it would work out.
No, I just really wanted to do it. And I realized the way I'm like set up, there's no real way to fail. Like there wasn't really any way to fail. You just kind of either, I forget I read this somewhere, but with this kind of business, you either give up or you succeed eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does make absolute sense. So then what was your first big win? Like what was your first, let's say, client that you actually got by yourself, without being recommended by somebody else? Or how did you actually get your first client apart from that very first one?
I think I may have gotten one client through posting those flyers. It was like some like Russian lady with a kid. And I worked with that girl for quite a while, even though she was like not the typical person I wanted to work with because she was pretty young. But the mom was like, oh, hey, like make her be a grade ahead. I'm like, I don't know anything about fourth grade, but let's try it out. It was really fun. And then I had a client who was, what was it? I think she was an adult and she liked working with me. And all these people found me through my website eventually. And I can tell you about like some interesting things I learned that like I just didn't know. So when I made the website, at first it was just me. I was Brooklyn Math Tutor, singular. And what I did differently than other people at the time was I did what we call content marketing. I just didn't know it was called that.
Mhm.
And since I was like learning about the tutoring industry, I just started writing what I learned. It's like, hey, why is this so expensive? 'Cause I had no idea. Like I didn't
Awesome.
understand
Mhm.
why it was expensive. So I wrote for clients, why is it expensive? Like, how do you do this? How do you not like the specific math stuff, but just like why do tutors suck? Or like why does somebody cost this much money? Or like where do you find someone for cheap? Like, don't hire me. If you're broke, here's what you do. And then I had another such like I remember these like interesting revelations. I was working with this like pretty cute girl that was only like a little younger than me, and she was in college, right? So that was a little bit tough. And I started asking people like, "Hey, why did you choose to work with me?" And I thought it would be, "Hey, because I have credentials and I have good SAT scores." And she said, "Oh, you look like a nice Jewish boy that would be good at math." And I was like, I was just shocked because I didn't realize that that's what people like. Now it makes sense. People choose you based on your character, but it was shocking to me to learn that.
Because you came from basically this very math sciencey background, so you probably didn't connect that well with the more emotional side of things. And really, because the way people make judgments is very emotional, and because we tend to think of ourselves as rational, we sort of struggle to see that in other people.
Yeah, when we're stupid about life, we tend to think that we're rational, and then as you learn more, you realize that like there is a part of you that, at the best of times, can act rational about certain things, and that's as good as it gets.
hmm hmm And then with content marketing, did you have to do anything to actually get your website to rank higher into Google? Was that even something that you were thinking about? Or how did you really approach this? What were the
Uh,
metrics basically that you were judging your progress by?
I don't quite recall if I had specific metrics, but I wasn't. I just kind of wrote about things that I thought would be useful, and it was easy at the time. I have to say it'd be much harder now. There's so much more competition now, and I've seen people do this much better than I did and much more successfully. Like there's a website called, oh, I forget what it's called, but they do just like amazing content about test prep. Prep Scholar, they're called Prep Scholar. Look them up. That's like the right way to do it. Like everything you could possibly want to know about test prep, like they've written it.
hmm
So anything you look, it comes up. And I was basically doing that about tutoring. The other thing I did was that since my business was a local business, I created a Google Places page, which was very
hmm
helpful. And I asked people for reviews, and some people were nice enough to leave them. And I think it made a big difference. You know, people say, "Hey, here's like, a bunch of 4-star review or 5-star reviews," and I compared to what other people did and what they did wrong. It's like, okay, this guy's photo, he looks like, well, he looks like a predator. Like, and he doesn't realize it.
Yeah, I see. That's really awesome, and I think that it really goes because a lot of people, at least that I know, and a lot of the younger entrepreneurs that I know, they sort of look for something that's going to scale very quickly, and they don't want to bother basically with the more organic stuff. And personally, most of the successful businesses that I've seen have grown to a large degree organically, and not through PPC and so on. But then a lot of people, they just want to do PPC, they just want to do ads and grow that way. So I wanted to ask you, have you done in that period any sort of advertising online via Google, maybe Facebook? And if so, what sort of results did you obtain and how did it go?
Sure. So this is something that I've thought about a lot too, and I'll kind of summarize it. I've never paid for marketing that works at all ever. I've tried paying for marketing like that, and it has never worked. Like nothing has ever worked where you pay directly for impressions or for whatever. Like I advertised in a local
Mm-hmm.
theater. I think I tried Facebook ads. I tried Google ads sometime before that. I actually bought Andy's PPC course, which is good, and I learned a lot. And then I realized, like, yeah, like the cost per click in my niche is like at least $10 to $15 per click,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to tell who's clicking. And I'm like, man, if I'm really spending that much, like I think there's better ways to do it. There's better ways to get kind of like long lasting building results. Like I should be writing more content. So I remember like reading about PPC, and people say, oh, it's an easy way to try things, but I haven't found it to be so. Maybe it's like a fear of spending money, and now it's like a lot of money. You want to get 10 people on, it's like $300. But I found that like creating content that's genuinely useful for people, like builds trust, it builds relationships. People are like, okay, this person wants to help me, and also I think to market with pay per click is a specific skill, any kind of paid ads, and if you haven't done it, you're not good at it. Just like you're not good at anything else you haven't done. So if you just throw money at Google and you're not like a PPC expert, like it's gonna suck. Or Facebook. So I haven't had any luck, and every time I look back to try it, I'm kind of reminded why I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I mean, it's been one thing that really fascinates me is that I've come across people who have spent $10,000 plus, for example, on Facebook ads, and they got zero results, but they still want to spend more money. And, for me, something in that equation doesn't make sense. If it's not getting you results, at some point you have to think that there has to be a better method, to get your clients.
I have a friend who I met through some local group, and he's starting a business, which I actually think has like scalability. And I asked him what he's doing to market it. And he's doing PPC ads, and he spent like $1,000 a month, and he's maybe gotten like 10 clients total. And I'm like, well, dude, if you're spending that much money, why don't you pay someone to just create some good content? Like that people will find, because people are searching for your stuff. You just don't know when they're searching. They may not be searching now. They may be searching later. And like, think how much content you can create for the $1,000 a month budget. It's a lot.
Absolutely. And the other thing is you can even hire a sales force, and the direct sales force tends to get, if you manage them well, tends to get much better results for that amount of money. I just think that people are naturally attracted to the fact that it seems easy, but actually paid advertising, especially online, and I will say especially online because there are problems with online advertising that you do not find with like direct mail or stuff like that. For example, click farming is a huge problem online. Like a lot of the clicks that people get when they do PPC, they're not actual real people who would ever be interested in what they have to sell. I've actually run, for example, some experiments with trying to get likes for a Facebook page. And you can get likes very cheaply, for like 1 cent a like. But those are basically people who their profiles basically do not look authentic. Like you see them liking stuff that the same person couldn't possibly like, things that are opposite one another. Like they have interest, for example, in fundamentalism, and then at the same time in atheism or something of that nature. And they have thousands of things that they like. It's like they like everything.
They're not a real person. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, a lot of online advertising is plagued by this problem. And if you're not aware of it, and if you're not somebody who works consistently with this, then you're not going to know when you fall in this trap. And I mean, I've audited a lot of accounts for clients who are doing PPC or some form of direct advertising online. And a lot of them are plagued by this problem and they don't even know about it. Even the ones who are successful, they could increase their bottom line by pretty much 30%, their profits, their ROI, just by getting rid of the click farming that they're affected by. So I think that it is a big deal. And I don't know why it's so popular. Perhaps all those gurus.
I think it's addictive.
Yeah.
The feedback is very quick.
Mm-hmm.
So like, oh, I put somebody in, I got to like roll the lever to see the immediate results. And I think you mentioned something with speaking earlier, like the people who are successful tend to build things up slowly and organically. Mm-hmm. Like Nicholas Taleb, he has this, I forget whatever quote, but it's like anything that's quick to build is quick to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So anything you could do real fast is also very fragile. So if you're paying for PPC, and then suddenly, like someone, comes in and they're bidding double or whatever, like, boom, that's it.
Yeah,
like,
agree.
What are you going to do?
Or a change in the algorithm, which distributes the money and the ads differently. It just can screw everything up, in one go. And I definitely agree with that. The problem is, like, you brought up something that's supremely important, in my opinion. namely the fact that ads are quick feedback. And we tend to get addicted indeed to the things that are quick feedback. And we tend to have a big problem, like big problem with following things that take a long time to get results and to give us feedback. And basically, I wanted to ask you how that affected you, especially at the beginning of your journey, like when you started doing content marketing and so on. I don't suppose that, the first article you posted, you had 10 clients knocking on your door, right? So how did you deal with the lack of feedback there? And how do you generally recommend to people to deal with things that take a long time to work out?
How to deal with the lack of feedback. I think I didn't expect anything to happen anytime soon, so I was pleasantly surprised. I'm currently starting like a YouTube channel with a friend, and he's been previously successful. So when things don't happen right away, he's like, "Oh, our video didn't get as many views. We have to change strategies." Like, dude, we posted like 4 videos. Like, calm down. So part of it is your expectation. Like, if you expect things to happen quickly and they don't, you're going to feel bad. So I think it's better. What is it? A man who expects nothing is really disappointed. I would say what I did was I focused on really providing interesting and useful information nobody was doing. I think it's harder now because there's a lot more information out there to be really truly like unique. But I was thinking, all right, if people find this, if someone wants to know, then I want them to find this, and they will. And I don't know when they will. And it didn't really matter to me to get feedback right away. I was just like, I think this is what I should be doing. So how should people deal with it? Be useful to people. I think really be useful, and people will find you and will appreciate it eventually. If it's useful. And if it's not, Google is good at helping you find stuff you want as long as it's not political.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah, I think that's the solid strategy. The difficulty that most people have is that they struggle to, because it takes a concentrated effort that needs to be consistent and for a longer time frame in order to start seeing results. And they struggle, like they begin it, right? And they post, as you said with your friend, they post 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 videos, and they see that there is very little response from the market. And then, that their mind starts thinking, oh, this is not working. What's going on? Maybe I shouldn't spend my time doing this. Maybe there's something better. How would you recommend that people deal with these sort of thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think you mentioned like coming from a math background. I think people with a mathy background, a certain kind of backgrounds, we have this idea that we're smart enough to understand the world, that like the world can be like understood with like our logic skills and our like deduction and whatever reasoning skills. And one of the like most useful things I've come to see is that the world is just far too complicated for us to try to predict anything. So it's futile to think about, oh, maybe there's like a better, like, oh, this didn't work right away, let me try something immediately thereafter. I think you do have to know when to give up, but you have to know that you have to come to terms with the fact that like you don't understand, you're not going to find the best optimal solution, right? There's maybe like just because some video goes viral doesn't mean you can replicate it. If you could, if anybody could, they'd be super rich right away, and nobody's doing it. So I think one is like accept your limitations, like, and just the reality that you won't know the best solution. You just kind of have to hope that what you're doing is useful and good enough and eventually works out. And maybe the other one, this I haven't tested this, so this is just coming out of my butt, but like see how long it's taken other people to build stuff. Because most of the ones I see, like, oh yeah, this guy, this is the one I mentioned before. He had this blog about how he traveled. He had a very interesting book, and it was like 365 days to overnight success. It seems like an overnight success, but he was like, I was writing every single day, and like, it wasn't overnight for him. For us, it just happened. For him, he was working for a long time. So I think if your idea is valid, and if you're doing something which is valuable, and you're getting some kind of feedback, keep at it, because if you keep changing gears, you will definitely not get anywhere. Like, you will certainly not get anywhere, versus you might not get anywhere and you might get somewhere.
I definitely agree with that and with the advice. I mean, the way I phrase it is that I say that you have to trust the process,
Yeah, better way. but
Yeah,
shorter.
exactly. So you have a reasonable process that you, for whatever reasons you expect is going to get you those results at some point in time. So you have to start the process and then you have to trust it so that you can actually get there. And if you lose faith in the process, then, you don't have any anchor pretty much. And you're just going to jump from one thing to the next. And we see a lot of people who are stuck, especially beginners. They jump from one thing to the other and they're never successful in anything because it's a learning process. It takes time. You actually need to figure out. And it's the small fine tunements and the small improvements that, one today, one tomorrow, and so on. And they add up. And you don't realize, how much better you are in a month if you improve every day.
Yeah, there's actually a great book I read about this called, I think it was actually called Good to Great. And so good title. And he talked about like what has helped businesses, like what has taken good businesses to become great businesses. And one of them was this idea, I think it may have been a different book. I apologize if I have it wrong, is that improvements happen. Like there's no like one event that you like do this thing and then bam, like you've taken off. Like it's such a common like trope in modern culture. Like, oh, this actor got discovered. It was like this one event.
Yeah.
But in practice, it's not how it works. Like it's just like you said, it's like little incremental improvements kind of like spin up the flywheel. And like getting the flywheel, he has this whole chapter on the flywheel. It's very hard to get it going. It's big and it's heavy and it's like standing still. And you kind of get it going and it's a little improvements. There's no like one big shove that makes it happen. Not for, I think, I don't know, the 99% of companies. Maybe some just get massively lucky with the first thing they do, but those are outliers and you can't replicate them.
For sure. And I mean, even to attempt to replicate them, you have to be out there. And a lot of people, they don't take any risks. They don't do anything. So the chances of success, if you like that, are zero. Like I like to say, you have to actually do something and put yourself out there to even stand a chance. So going back a little to your business then, you mentioned that you basically started growing through content marketing and initially it was just yourself. What was the point when you sort of said to yourself, I need to hire a tutor? Because hiring a tutor came first before a manager, right?
Oh, long before, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So what was the point? Like, were you 1 year in the business? How long after you were basically working yourself did you decide to do that? And why did you do it? How did you do it? And basically, how did you approach the entire process?
So I did it too late. I did it poorly. And I didn't do a good job of it overall. And I would have done it completely differently now. But how I actually did it was, I think I was close to 2 years in. And I was at the point where I was like, okay, I have a lot of clients and I see that like, I kind of need to scale. I didn't think of it as that, but I was like, I need help to manage these clients. I need help to like make some money. And I was like, I didn't feel good about the idea of giving out clients and then taking a percent cut. Like I felt bad about it looking back, like, come on, man. But so how did I find this person? I don't quite recall. I think I posted an ad on Craigslist. I found some girl who's pretty reasonable. Oh no, before that I found someone else who contacted me. And I tried, since it made a bit to remember it clearly, I tried like coming up with different arrangements. How do we split this? I felt really bad about the idea of being like, I'm the manager and you get like 60% of the pay. Cause I didn't want to be in that position. But this is something that I think is interesting to note is I see now that tutors actually do want to be in that position. I didn't want to be in the position of working for someone else, but other people love being in the position of working for someone else. And it's so weird. Like they don't want to take the risk. They don't want to take the initiative. And I didn't understand that because I had that fallacy, whatever it's called, that I think everyone's like me and they're really not. Like we're quite different. So how was that process? It was like very unstructured. I talked to a person. I was like, well, this person's probably good enough. I don't know. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. That's how I would put it.
I see. So when you decided to start with the hiring, what was your revenue like?
I don't recall. It wasn't a lot. How much was I making a month? Maybe like 2,000 to 3,000. The thing with tutoring is that it only happens during certain hours. So it's kind of harder to put in to get like 30 hours of work a week. You maybe get like 12.
Yeah, I see.
So it's going to be hard for me to recall the revenue. I wasn't making much money then at all, but I was like, okay, like there's more demand than I can comfortably handle. And also I found that after a certain amount of clients, like I just started doing a bad job. Like past like 10 clients a week, I just was tired. I remember like days with snowstorms. I'm like biking to like some customer and I'm killing myself to get to their home, and like a foot of snow. It was awful.
Yeah, you didn't have the energy to handle more clients. I mean, would you say that you're sort of an introverted person? Because introverts generally, and I'm an introvert as well, we tend to lose our energy, when we encounter a lot of people in the same day.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people are surprised because I'm very social, I'm talkative, and I love to engage with people. But then I need to get the hell away from them. I'm okay with like individuals. I can hang out with like one person for a while if they have a high, like signal to noise ratio, if they're not full of crap, but I can talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
But I get easily overstimulated by like groups of people, by being in the city, traffic noises.
I'm the same.
Yeah, just stuff gets to me.
Yeah, because a lot of people are also surprised about me because they think I have a big mouth and I'm really outgoing and so on and so forth, which is sort of true if you put me in a social setting, but that's draining on me. I don't like it. If I can choose, I choose not to. So
also introversion is orthogonal to shyness. Like there are extroverts who are shy and they're really weird, but you could be not shy and you could be socially skilled.
I agree.
But
yeah. Mm-hmm.
you get tired from it. And I'm like that. My wife is like that. Most people I know who are, I think, sensitive people just get tired from stimulation because I don't know why, but that's how it seems to be.
We think more. Who knows?
We think more, or we're more easily affected by the stimulus versus people who like, I just can't tell if anything's happening inside their mind at all. Like things don't seem to penetrate, but they're okay.
Yeah, I see. Right. So going back here, so you basically didn't have much revenue, but you decided because
it was a lot for me at the time, man.
yeah. But I mean, in terms of to be in a position where you say that you can easily give money to hire people. Because this is the anxiety. The reason I bring this up is because this is the anxiety for a lot of people. They wonder, should I start hiring already? Because I sort of am not making that much of a revenue. Is this the right thing for me? And I think that your example, and certainly, the first time I opened my agency, and I started hiring people, it was a big thing and it was a big deal for me mentally, because I didn't know if I could actually do it. But by doing it, I started earning much more. And of course, then it became easier to support it and sustain it and actually grow it. But the first time you do it and you start hiring people, you do have that, or at least I did, going through my mind, if I'm actually ready to do it.
Well, I cheated, because as a tutoring agency owner, I don't hire people; they're contractors. So the structure of the business is set up such that if there isn't work, there's no expense for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I have like to pay them a fixed salary.
I see.
So I think the first person I even vaguely hired was my manager, like 8 years later. And that was scary because like, oh my God, I'm going to pay her like some small fixed amount. That it's scary.
Yeah.
But it was scary just to have another, like to add complexity to the system. Because, it's kind of clean when you're a freelancer, like, hey, you give me work, I do work, we're done. And then you suddenly add this layer, this layer of management and overhead and okay, but now I'm making only 40%. And it's scary. For sure.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that you said about the contract deal where they basically get a commission from you and you don't pay the tutors any fixed amount, that's really good. And it actually took me a long time to learn that. Like, initially I thought that you have to have people in an office and everybody has to be there and that's how work has to be done. It took me quite some time to realize that no, you don't actually need to have people in an office. People can work from anywhere. And, basically
for the one.
Yeah, exactly. So I ended up being way ahead of, because everybody after COVID, they started to learn about working from home, working from wherever, So as I learned about these things and I started implementing them with the people that I worked with, I sort of moved to the arrangements that you had with your tutors. Like nowadays, I work with several copywriters. I call them lead copywriters, and they would handle along with me managing the project. And all of them are paid, at least in part, based on the results that they achieve. And that's much better both ways because they get paid more, and they actually have to reach those targets and those results.
Absolutely. Yeah, the person I actually hired was my manager because I didn't even hire her. Actually, I ended up doing something similar. Like I ended up creating this kind of hybrid scheme where I pay her some like fixed, very small like maintenance amount. And then as we work together more, I said, you know what? Like you're really taking a lot of ownership. I'm just going to give you 25% of the profits of the clients you manage.
Awesome.
And I realized like it so cleanly aligns our incentives because it's like I don't like telling people do this, you should be in the office at this time. It's I mean, we don't have an office, right? Her office is wherever she happens to be. And it works super well because it's like, well, she sees what happens if you don't get back to clients, like they don't sign up. So and since it directly affects her income, it provides good incentives for everyone.
You mentioned Nassim Taleb earlier, and this actually reminds me of the book about skin in the game. And his idea that, people, in order to actually produce results, they need to have skin in the game. And the moment when as you said, the incentives are not aligned for the two parties, things can go awry.
Yeah, like Google ads. Like, does Google really have incentive to make ads as cheap as possible?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. I mean, that's one of the things, because those companies, they do sort of try to combat click farming, but at the same time, they do make money out of it. Like if a click farmer clicks on your ad, they still charge you. So, are the incentives really aligned? Of course, they are trying to do stuff, but
it's murky. It's like they're in a position where like, well, like they don't have an incentive to make it as cheap as possible for us. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So hiring then was key for you to growing your business, especially when I presume you hired the manager. So what was the idea there? And after you answer this, I'm also very curious how you developed your hiring process. And basically, what do you look at in people? How do you judge people? Do you rely on your gut? All this sort of interesting discussion. But let's go first with the hiring the tutor bit.
Oh, hiring the tutors or
the manager? Sorry.
Well, actually, we can't because it's in the wrong order. The manager was a tutor.
I see.
So I'm gonna answer your second question first, and then talk about the manager afterwards because it was kind of a natural extension. So hiring tutors was super critical, and I was very bad at it because I didn't know what to look for. So over time, it's one of the few things I say I think I nailed it. I really figured it out, and it took me a long time to go from having people that weren't reliable, weren't trustworthy, or whatever, to having people that are like, none of my current tutors give me problems. It's just amazing. That book, Good to Great. Let me backtrack a little bit. I used to have all sorts of problems with tutors, just like you do with anyone you work with. People didn't show up on time, or they were rude, or they were unpredictable, unreliable, had issues. And my first thought, as a capitalist, I was like, well, maybe I'm not paying people enough to be whatever, or maybe I need to go extreme ownership on them and try to train them or whatever. And it turned out that's really not the case. There was a really good line I read in that book, Good to Great, and it said, when you hire the right people, management problems disappear. And I found it to be so true. I found that my tutors who were newer and that were kind of filtered by better hiring processes were just so much better on average. I mean, I had some exceptional tutors before, but on average, they're just so much. It's not that they're better. It's that there's no catastrophically bad tutors. I just don't have anyone who's bad. So what did I do? At first, I was like, okay, I want to get math tutors. So they have to be good at math. So I'm pretty tough at interviews. I'm kind of ruthless, but I was only ruthless about how how good they are. So if they didn't know something, I'd be like, all right, look, like you can't come in here, tell me you're a math tutor and you can't do like algebra. That's no bueno. But I would kind of let personal things, I didn't pay attention to them as much. I was like, okay, this person's trying or whatever. Like I wasn't looking at it seriously. And then over time, here's what I did to get good tutors. I post on Indeed. I used to post on Craigslist, same thing, but now Indeed is more popular. And if you look at most job ads, they're like, I don't know, like 100 words long. They're pretty short. And they're kind of vague. And you're like, I don't know. So instead, I think I will send it to you for your amusement. My job ad looks like a sales letter, I think. Like it's like very long. Like I've never seen such a long post. It takes you through this whole process like you're in a dungeon and you're like, all right, look, I'm going to save you all the time of talking to me and calling me. Like read this thing. You will know everything you need to know about whether you're a good fit for this company. So people basically read it. And I have all these ways like, look, if you're this kind of person, it's not going to work. Like if you're ever late, it's not going to work. Do you take like more than like 48 hours to get back to emails? It's not going to work. Like, do you like to travel? It's not going to work. So like all these conditions, I started realizing like what kind of conditions make people, they create room for drama. Because it's a probabilistic event. Like if there's a 1 out of n chance of something happening, if you try it enough, it's going to happen. So you just have to have people who don't have it. So I used to be like, oh, this person's whatever, but they're cool. Let me look at it a different way. Here's maybe a much more succinct way of saying it. I used to look for people who have exceptional positive traits. And now what I do is I ruthlessly filter out anyone with negative traits that I know might cause problems. So anyone that's like, all right, I think this person might be unreliable, out. This person might have like an attitude problem, out. Like there was like one girl that like, and you have to really trust your gut because it's very interesting in a negative sense. Like you can't trust your gut in a positive sense. We all want to say, oh, this person's great. Like, okay, it's more like you have to like find anything that looks like a red flag because it's always, someone said like, it's like cockroaches. If there's one, there's going to be more. So like, I'll give you some examples. This girl is writing to meet me at some place. And I was interviewing a bunch of tutors. This was for an interview. And I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I won't be able to make our meeting at this time. Can you do, I put like 2:30 or 3. I gave it. And her answer was like one word, yes. And I was like, aha, right? Like here's somebody who like doesn't think before they speak and doesn't communicate clearly. And so I wrote to her, I was like, hey, look, like this is not useful, whatever. So I don't think it makes sense for us to meet. And instead of her being like, hey, I'm sorry, I got a nasty response. I was like, oh, I was right. Of course I was right.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff. So basically what I do now is I have this long post that's very clear what kind of person I'm looking for and what specifically doesn't tend to work. And what I find happens, it attracts people who see that I'm serious, for one, and who more or less pass the criteria. Like they kind of like, because like it's basically, it's like, look, if you're not communicative, you're not going to be it. If you think me texting you or like emailing you and expecting a response is too much, like, no, go away. And I think people have honest enough self-assessment. They're like, oh yeah, I'm a prick. Like I don't want to, I'm looking for something more, I don't want to communicate. Like no problem. So it took me a while to get to that process. And the way we do it is with my manager, and I'll tell you about her later. Her, I got lucky. I hired like way before I had any of this. Is I interviewed the person, the manager interviews the person, and back when I lived in New York, my wife would interview the person with me, and we kind of focused on this, like avoid problems at all costs. So if any of us had an issue, we'd say no.
I see. Yeah.
Like if anyone said, something doesn't feel right, because you don't need to know what it is that doesn't feel right. You know, it's like you may be able to name it later, but your intuition is good at spotting problems. And I found that in my life, but also especially in business, anytime I try to ignore a problem and think, oh, it's fine, like it's never fine. It is never, ever, ever fine. It always comes up at some point that bites you in the ass. Guaranteed. So that's our hiring process. Do you have any questions about that in specific? Like, I'm not sure which I covered, which I didn't.
I don't have any questions, but I think that it's just fascinating. So I have some comments. You mentioned the ruthless aspect of it, and I agree because I'm the same, and a lot of people complain about it when it comes to hiring, but it's effective. You actually need to judge people and to be quick at it. And a lot of our society, it trains us, don't do that. You're a bad person if you do that, and so on. And that's what I think holds a lot of people back when it comes to getting good at hiring and managing other people. Like, you have to face the truth and the reality, whatever that is, even if it's painful. It might be painful even to you to tell somebody that you don't want them, but it's the truth. You have to do it. So that would be one comment. The other one that I wanted to make is that I've also found the same thing with regards to trusting your gut in the negative sense, which you mentioned. And I think that's very important because we sort of notice these patterns and we've seen them before, but we can't exactly pinpoint, when we've seen them before. But our intuition knows it. We've seen it before. We know how it's going to play out, but we can't quite put it into words. So if you don't trust that, you can make a lot of mistakes. So I think that's also very important. The way nowadays that I do it when I have to interview somebody, and one tactic that I found very useful, and it actually approaches what you mentioned about how you post your ad and you write the bad stuff in it and so on. The way I do it, one of my most important questions that I basically ask them is I describe them the job when I actually do the interview at its toughest. The hardest day in that job. I describe them and I tell them how much it's going to suck, how it's going to be like, and so on. And I discovered that there are basically 3 different answers that people give. Number one is they say, yes, I want to do it. I have no problem. Let's go. And if they answer like that, it's bad. And it means that basically they're desperate. They would do anything to get hired. And you don't want that person. And that's the first answer. The second answer is that they start to have second thoughts, and they're not sure. Well, I'm not sure if this is for me anymore, and so on. Then you don't want that person because probably they're not going to have the commitment that you need when the going gets tough. And the third answer, which you're looking for, is basically that they face up to the challenge and they're willing to do it, but not in an overly enthusiastic way. Like, they're realistic about it.
There's 2 things I wanted to add. One, I touched on before. I used to think that, because I had like unprofessional behavior from tutors, I thought, I'm not paying them enough. And then in that same book, that book was very good because the Good to Great book, like, he did a lot of research. And another key takeaway is that job performance doesn't depend on salary. Like, basically, you can't motivate character. Like, if someone's going to be really do their best or not, and if you pay them more, it doesn't really matter as long as you're paying them enough. Right? It has to be enough. So I used to think I need to get these more expensive people. And then I found like they're the same. You just have to find people that have the right attitude. And the other big thing, this is probably I don't know, this is not related to a lot of businesses, but it's related to mine, so I'll share, is like not that long ago, I realized there's 2 kinds of tutors. 2 kinds. One is like side hustle people who are like, hey, I have a cool degree and I look cool and people think I should be good at teaching. So I'm going to I have some other passion, like I'm into art or I'm a starving actor, but I went to Harvard, so I can make good money as a tutor because parents are dumb and pick tutors from Harvard. And I realized that those people are a pain. Like, some of them can be good, but you can find people that are cheaper and better that are professional educators, people who are actually dedicated to teaching. What I found are much better, have like a massive investment in education, have better attitudes, and cost less. It's just crazy. Like, once you realize that a different, you can have people that want to do the same kind of job with vastly different qualifications. And the people who are more qualified are like more humble, cost less, and do better. You just have to know that that's what you're looking for.
That's fascinating. And I definitely agree with that. I mean, I found the same thing, that job performance doesn't really correlate with salary. Like, of course, I agree with you. You have to pay people enough, but beyond that point, and that's actually a mistake that I've seen people make. And also people suggested to me many times about this, like, friends and so on. They see that somebody did a good job, for example, and they suggest, oh, you should pay him extra. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't, because he should do a good job. I shouldn't reward him above and beyond what he normally gets rewarded in terms of monetary compensation, just because he did what he is supposed to do. Like, that's the wrong mindset. And you can train people the wrong way if you do that.
The salary is not to do a poor job. The salary is to do a good job.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And I think that a lot of people make a lot of mistakes with hiring, and I don't know exactly why. I think that a large part of the reason is that they want everybody to like them. And if you want everybody to like you, it's difficult, to hire people and to be an objective judge of others. It's just hard. You can't judge someone's character and at the same time, cling on what they will think about you.
Yep.
So,
you asked me about my manager, right? I didn't get to that part yet.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you how I hired my manager. So my manager was one of our tutors that was working for me. And she's this very, very nice woman who is like vastly overqualified to be a tutor. I mean, she used to teach, but she has kids. And I tried to actually have several managers before this one. I like really foolishly tried to partner with one of my previous tutors to be a manager. That didn't work. And then I just started realizing, all right, I need someone with the right kind of character. And then I was like, oh, I have this tutor who's very nice, and she's good at the subject. Like she's a math tutor and used to be a math teacher. And she's like an actual grown-up human being, for God's sakes. Like she's not a kid. So I approached her. I was like, hey, would you want to be the manager for this company? I can't pay you almost anything because I have no idea how much, like what's going to happen. And I don't know how to do this at all. I don't know how to have a manager. I don't know how to like split the responsibility between us. But would you be interested? Because it might be something that works out well for you in the future. I'd love for someone to like take over more of it. And she took a chance on us, because I was like, look, I could pay like $5 an hour when you happen to be around your phone. And then more if like, if somebody actually calls. So we went through a whole process of like training her. So I like got a bunch of tutors to like call her and like play funny roles as irritating parents. Because I also, this is something I didn't mention, but besides being kind of ruthless about filtering our tutors, I also filter our clients. Like if someone calls and they sound like a pain in the ass, I try to like steer them away from our company.
Nice.
Like, because it's just going to hurt me and hurt our reputation and hurt, our tutors. So like we had like training phone calls, which I guess if I had a lot of managers, I would like make it something systematic and organized. And then I kind of just gave her like little by little. I was like, all right, so, you're taking like when you have this much time, take phone calls, see what happens. And we would like talk about it. And so she kind of basically like had like on the job training for like probably close to like 6 months to a year, and just like slowly took over more clients. And throughout that process, we like figured, okay, this doesn't work. Like this method of paying her doesn't work. Or like this becomes really irritating. And it evolved. And I see like I wouldn't have been able to do it from like zero to where it is now. It kind of had to go in this process. And it's at a super good place because like I know her, she's reliable, like we get along. She has a good personality for our clients. Like she's very nice. I'm not as nice, but she's nice. So she's not gonna, and she's sensitive. She's not gonna say anything accidentally offensive, which I would. We discussed this last time.
Yeah,
and like it was just kind of like back and forth, So I think there's similar kinds of roles, kind of like a salesperson who gets mostly paid by commission, and that's kind of what she is. Like her job is a client manager. And I felt like the best way to compensate her, because she sees, hey, like, why am I making $100,000 a year while she's doing all the work? That doesn't seem right somehow. So to compensate her, we set it up so that the clients she manages, she gets, the like 25% of the recurring, I guess, net, but more or less the profit from the minus some like minor expenses, which as I mentioned, like creates a good incentive. And it's amazing how well things work when you work with competent people who you trust. It's just like, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's one of the keys for any sort of business to grow. And I mean, what sort of numbers are you doing nowadays? So after you have one manager still, I suppose, and the tutors now, is that right?
Yep. So if you talk about like last year and this year I think is going to be bad. It's going to be like 25% worse than last year. But like the last 2 years, I think our revenue was like close to around like 260 or 300,000. So it's somewhere in that painful phase between like a tiny company and like a small company. And so my profit is about 40% of that, or maybe around now 35% of that, somewhere around there. There's of course like credit card fees and annoying stuff. So, my yearly income isn't super high, right? Like it's been around like somewhere in the low six figures, between like 90,000, 110,000, depending on how you want to do expenses. Yeah. And adding the manager cuts into that, by good chunk. But I have like 4 hours of work a week. Like I got the Tim Ferriss 4 hour. I don't actually even have 4 hours of work. It's only some weeks I have 4 hours of work.
That's awesome, because I mean, you've built a business that allows you to live the lifestyle that you want. And I mean, that's great. And I mean, scaling to 300K, but starting from scratch with a tutoring business, I mean, that's quite big. I think
only
that you should definitely be proud of that,
Yeah. What's interesting is now I see, man, I could have done it in like a third of the time or less had I had like any clue at all.
How would you have done it? So if you were to go back and you were to do it from scratch today, how would you do it?
Well, that's interesting. That's like the next thing I'm working on, is like helping other people in my position. Like a big part of it is just like avoiding mistakes, like knowing how to, like you have a lot of standard operating procedures, how to deal with situations that are like easy to figure out now, like setting up the right system, like all the little improvements I made to make things more efficient, understanding the kind of customers I have, because my customers are not like me. Like I'm an educated person that's broke, that comes from a broke background, whereas our customers are kind of like the elite of New York City in a sense.
Yeah,
like they're people who went through like Princeton and whatever. I shouldn't make fun of them. They're not bad people. So, I would start looking for them in the right place. I would still do content marketing. I think if I just start from scratch, I got really lucky. I chose a niche subject that's in demand. That was pure luck. Like I just happened to be good at something. If I was like, hey, I want to be a Spanish tutor, I would have been shit out of luck. Like nothing Spanish tutor in like Chicago. Like it wouldn't have worked. So if I was to do it now, I would try to find something that's in demand. There's a lot of things like that. And make a nice website that seems to matter. I would do social media. I personally hate social media, but I would do social media. I would make videos. I would basically try to find the free channels that like get the attention. Like maybe I would even, if I was younger, I'd even do TikTok. I mean, I will shoot myself before I download TikTok. That's because I'm almost 40, right? Like it's inappropriate. But I mean, the Gary V disagrees, but like we have our different boundaries. So I would do some things the same. I would just avoid the multitude of mistakes that are like totally waste of time, waste of money. I would try to like find, where these parents hang out. Yeah, that's kind of vague, but if you ask me more specifically, I could try to give a better answer.
So, I mean, what would you say that the top 5, the first thing I want to ask is basically what are the top 5 mistakes that you would avoid?
Oh man. One, partnering with someone. Like don't partner with people when you don't know anything about business. I've done this like twice. Like thinking that you need someone to have some skills. Like if you're young, like learn it, whatever it is, unless it's like, I don't know, you don't need to learn like crazy 3D design skills, but like basic things like writing, web design, like simple web design. And in fact, now you don't even need to know web design. Like all these themes are like gorgeous with like drag and click. Like you don't even have to try.
Agreed.
So thinking you need help, like whatever you need help with, like learn it yourself. Like because you need to have either money to hire someone. And if you don't, like don't think that bringing in the person is going to make things better. It's going to make things infinitely more complicated. Because now instead of just dealing with yourself, you have to deal with a human being. And if you're young, you don't know how to deal with a human being. You just don't know. And it's like more complicated than a marriage. And anyway, so like one, I wouldn't partner with anyone. Two, I would probably do most of, I wouldn't like waste time on flyers and things like that, or at least not the way I did. Maybe I would, I mean, I wouldn't be as indiscriminate. Like, if I did any kind of in-person advertising, I'd probably do it with like something more cute, like pens or pencils, not like flyers. Everybody does that. I wouldn't work as much. This is another thing I mentioned in our call before, but I got kind of lucky because I started managing my business after kind of a break when I was physically away from it. And so I had to manage it instead of tutoring. And what a lot of people do is they get stuck in the freelance trap where they're too busy freelancing instead of actually creating a business.
Mm-hmm.
So I would try to like get to the point where I'm orchestrating the business as quick as possible. Oh, biggest one. You're gonna appreciate this. I would have a mailing list as soon as possible. Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to learn how to write, and I didn't want to send people emails. And so like I've had like God knows how many customers who I just never kept their email. And now I see like those are the absolute most valuable things you can do is like mailing list. Start mailing people. Nobody can take away a mailing list. Like get good at mailing lists. Get good at like that kind of like communication because it seems very antiquated, but it's so valuable. Like
Mm-hmm.
people respond to emails. They don't respond to TikTok posts.
Of course.
Maybe they do. I think that's 4. The other mistakes is like hiring problematic people. Like that's the other biggest thing is like
Yeah.
hiring people that I have a bad feeling about. That I'm like, oh, but this guy or this girl, like, well, but she's got a PhD from, Yale. Well, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter. Basically, putting up with things that do or can cause trouble down the line, I would not do any of those, including customers, like getting rid of bad customers, like just anything that's a pain, get rid of it now instead of later. That's 5.
Yeah, perfect. So I agree with pretty much all of them. I just wanted to say about partnering. I think it can work. It hasn't worked for me generally. I will tell you that. But I think that it can work. I've just been kind of bad at choosing generally in my past. I mean, I've not been the best person at choosing partners, but I agree that it works much better if you go at it alone many times. And if you have to choose a partner, then you need to be really good at choosing the right partner, and that's difficult.
Well, why would you be good at it? You have no reason to be good at it if you've never done it, right? So I think someone who's done business before, and like, we talked at the beginning of this podcast about like growing as a person and learning to deal with yourself and others. If you're like a young guy listening to this, like you don't know yourself, like forget someone else. Like you don't even know like what a good partner would look like. You have no, like some people get lucky and you hear about them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And maybe you have a best friend you have a good working relationship with, and maybe you ran a lemonade stand together, or maybe whatever you did, like maybe that's okay. But it's so hard just to learn like the mindset of a business owner and to try to combine it with like dealing with a person who has different motivations than you. It's really tough. Like I'm kind of partnering with people on things now, and I'm like, man, I could not have done this even 5 years ago.
It's harder than hiring. I will give you that. It's harder than hiring, finding a good partner.
100%. It's much harder because you can't get rid of them.
Exactly.
Right. There's so many mistakes to make. Like not only the person, like they have to have the right character. They have to have, like, you have to get along with them. You have to have the same vision. They have to be as motivated as you. And that's something I found that I'm having a hard time. Like I find people that I like, but they don't have the same motivation. Or for them, it's like, yeah, we're doing this, but it's kind of like a side thing. I'm like, well, dude, like it's never going to go everywhere as a side thing.
I agree.
So
yeah.
There's just so many like stars that have to align. And I think when you get older and more experienced, and maybe if you know more business people, that you have a relationship with them or something, then yeah, like it definitely can be successful. And I suspect that the return is like not linear. I think it's probably more geometric.
Yes, I agree.
If you get the right people, you can do something extremely good. And I was reading a book on this, based like they're like saying like hire everything, like hire someone like good at everything. Like that's great if you have like exceptional people skills and you know how to do that, and you have the access to those people. Like, I'd love to hire someone to do everything, and I could even pay for it, but like I don't know how to find those people reliably.
Mm-hmm. That's the biggest problem. And I mean, that's why hiring and finding partners, I mean, is much harder than hiring for pretty much any other position in your
Yep.
company. As you said, the variables are so vast and so many stars, as you were saying, need to align. It's just very difficult to get right. And I agree. I think that if you have a lot more experience under your belt and you've interacted with people a lot more, it can get easier. But I think that it's always something that's going to be hard, and you need to be very careful when you do it, think very carefully before. And I agree, from a mindset point of view, you definitely don't need a partner for most businesses. You can start them on your own. I wanted to ask you one more thing about one of the other factors that you mentioned. So you mentioned the mailing list. So, I mean, tell me a bit about that. What are you doing in terms of your mailing list now? How are you getting people onto your mailing list? Are you running any sort of funnel? How does that work?
No. I mean, I'm hopeless. I was talking about a mailing list of your previous customers. Like, I didn't even have that. Like, it's that bad that I didn't keep track of who my customers were and didn't email them next year and be like, hey, Jenny, hey, summer's over, get your kid back in tutoring. I didn't even do that. That was the mistake. I don't have a funnel or mail list or anything like that. I guess I could. I haven't considered it. Maybe I should consider it. But I'm just talking about the keep in touch with your customers, because they'll work with you and then they're done. But if they haven't worked with you for 6 months, a lot of people will remember, oh, we had a great experience, but some of them might not. So it's good to give them a gentle poke and say, hey, we have some new useful content. We figured something out. Here's how to cure anxiety about math, something. And I before COVID, I was sending out emails every couple of months. And I think it helped people remember that we exist. And during COVID, I was like, man, I don't know what to do. I have no idea. I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah, I see. I think that in your case, a mailing list can be something that is very, very useful. And I mean, more expanded, imagine that somebody checks out your content, for example, and then they also join your mailing list. You can spend a lot of time nurturing them. You've made a big effort putting out all the content to get them to your website. Once they're there, it sort of makes sense to me from a business point of view that you capture them and you nurture them. And I mean, imagine if you can connect with those people without having to bring them back on your website. I think
not having to pay-per-click them, yeah. For that, but see, this is maybe something that you can advise me on, because I feel like I've gotten to a point where I just don't care anymore. I feel like I want someone else to do that part. I spent 10 years. That sounds crazy that it's been 10 years, but I spent a long time on this. And it's I'm not interested in the subject of my business anymore. I used to really care. I was a tutor. I haven't tutored anyone in a long time. And I'm not in the mental space to be writing about hey, the SATs are canceled this year. What should you do? Or Governor Cuomo is, screwing up our school system, blah, blah, blah. So I want to find someone who is interested in that and can write. Because I see, contrary to what I said before, you should definitely have skills at a moderate level, but at the end you got to hire people who do these things well. There's people who will write 10 times faster than me and they do it well, and there's no reason why I should be doing it instead of them. So how do I find someone to do this part?
Right. So I would say that the first thing is to look amongst the people that you are already hiring. If there is somebody who has the enthusiasm and who has the interest to move.
I've tried.
You've tried already. All right. Then I would say that you definitely want to look for somebody who has written content, specifically content in this niche in education related content. So job boards are useful. Platforms like Upwork are also useful, places like Indeed. But again, you have to screen really carefully for the person and vet them well. One of these things, one of the important factors when you're hiring for such a position, I've hired similar positions, VAs, people to help me manage stuff that I do on a regular basis, create content and that sort of stuff. you need to vet them really well, and you need to set up processes to get your content created and distributed in multiple formats. Like, I'll give you an example. So I'm doing this podcast, for example, and the podcast is basically a great way to also create content and share valuable content, something that's high value for me as well, and I can do myself, you know? And the beauty of it is that these podcasts, they get recorded, transcripts get created based on them automatically, pretty much by software. Then they get inspected by a VA and a writer, for any mistakes. And then based on the actual podcasts and the ideas in it, these people are going to take the most important ideas and create other content based on them. And so I have basically a system, and all I do is the actual recordings, and then everything else, the whole distribution of content by email, by on the blog, and so on, gets done by my team. And I think that you want to set a process that's sort of like this. Look at creating content if you're going to do it in a way that is going to be easily replicable in different formats, and somebody, they don't have to be a genius, but they can take this content and put it in other formats. If you want to hire somebody to do the whole thing, I would say that obviously look for somebody who has the passion and the interest for it of the get-go, and then get them to create the content in the format that's easiest for them. So if they prefer audio content, set up a podcast or something with them and do weekly episodes, and then get somebody else, a writer, to actually take those episodes, identify the big ideas, and create content based off them. A lot of the thing that actually works when it comes to creating content, I found out, is that you need to get the core ideas. The hard part is the core ideas and the big ideas basically behind the things. The details and actually putting them out in different formats and so on, those are the small details. If you get the big ideas right, the other stuff you can have your team to get on and do it.
This is probably the next step for me for my meta business of helping people run these tutoring companies, start run these tutoring companies.
Tell me a bit more about that, actually. I mean, we've talked about your main business. We've gone, I think, through a lot on it. We've covered a lot of ground, how you've started, how you've grown through content marketing, how you've hired people, how you've actually built this into a stable, let's say, organization that's positioned to grow. So, I mean, tell me about this new initiative now.
Well, so some time ago, I was looking at, what do I do next? This business is kind of going okay, and I'm sort of losing my passion for it. Like I'm not as kind of aged out of like really caring about this. I haven't been in school for a long time. I haven't been tutoring people for a long time. So I'm like, well, what do I do? I was like, oh yeah, I'm kind of good at running this kind of company. So I was like, well, why don't I help other people run this kind of company? Because there are tons of tutors out there who I think would like to be a little bit more independent than like working for some agency or God forbid, one of those like online platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, why don't I help them? Because one of the biggest things in business is like knowing that it can be done. If you don't think it can be done, you don't do it. If you say, oh, this guy did it, or like here's like some step-by-step, not all of it step-by-step, but some of it really is like these problems are solved. Like like these problems that seem hard are really not hard.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing that can be solved, or better yet, partnering with someone here, we're talking about partnering, who can do like the difficult things or the irritating things for you. So some time ago, I saw this blog called Food Truck Empire. This guy basically made an entire blog about running a food truck, even though he's never run a food truck. So I was like, all right, if this bastard could like make money telling other people how to run a food truck without ever running a food truck, I could certainly make money telling people or helping people run tutoring companies.
Yeah.
So I started a website. I didn't even finish it because I had a lot of life stuff that happened. But I also started making YouTube videos, just kind of like putting out content. Like, hey, here's how you do this, or here's how you hire, or here's like what to do if someone canceled. And I started in 2018. Then I just stopped because me and my wife were like, hey, let's move to Japan. Like that was tough. And I'm starting that again. And we talked about this, when we chatted before. So Basically, I'm trying to figure out how I can help people. I don't have like a product to sell yet. I'm like, buy my course for only $20,000. It's going to cost more though in some way, because what I want to do is I want to partner with people who don't want to do all the like tedious work of like learning all the stuff I had to learn, and instead one like, here's a guide to like 60% of it, and like you talk to me for the other 40% of it that's like kind of too hard to write or is this sort of more domain knowledge, and like I help you start these companies, because there's like so many people out there that like are really good, really great tutors, no business sense and no business confidence. So if I get like 10 or 20 of them, I'll be pretty happy to help them out and make lots of cash.
That's awesome. I mean, have you got any inquiries so far? And what's the growth strategy? Are you going to rely primarily on YouTube here, or what do you envision?
One of the very first videos I posted, some guy wrote to me and saying, "Oh, hey, this is me who like, just spends all my time tutoring, whereas I should be growing a business." And I actually was talking to him about partnering. Nice. But I think his wife didn't like the idea for whatever reason. He was an older guy, so I think he was a little bit more set in his life. But it actually could have worked out, because like I saw what he was doing. It's like, yeah, he's exactly the kind of person that needs my help.
Awesome, yeah.
I know another tutor in person that was just like this guy, tutors a different subject, but he makes a ton of money, but he has no business. Like if he even mentions like, yeah, if I stop tutoring, I have no company to sell. I'm like, well, why don't you change that? Like, why don't you change that? He's like, well, all right, fine. So I think I need to find people who are a little bit more open-minded. So my strategy has been very passive in terms of I'll make some videos, hoping people find me. As you mentioned, that's probably not the best way to do it. We talked about this, and I remember I did think about reaching out to tutors, but I was like, I don't know. I have to pay for LinkedIn Premium, but I think I should try the thing you suggested, which is to like contact people. I hate the idea of spamming like hundreds of people. Be like, hey, do you want to make more money and smell fresh? Like, but maybe it should be done. I hate when people write to me and offer me things I wasn't looking for. And yet there's a whole history of like direct sales that works. So I'm a bit torn. Please convince me.
Yeah, well, for me, I've grown pretty much my entire business from cold outreach and some referrals. But until recently, I've done very little to almost none when it comes to actually doing inbound or content or stuff like that. Most of it has been cold outreach, and it can work very well. So, I mean, obviously you can't get everybody that you reach out to, and obviously your offer isn't going to be super relevant to everybody that you reach out to. But there are some people there who are going to be a good fit for it. So the way I look at it, the initial outreach that you do, that first email that you get to establish contact, and the goal of that one is to gauge their interest. Are they interested in this sort of thing, or are they not? Because if they're not, it's not a problem. Like obviously it's not a good deal for them for whatever reason. They're not interested in it. And basically your goal is to identify the people who are not a good fit, and single them out. And then, of course, you're left to the people who reply to you and who are a good fit, and you can actually take the conversation forward from there. So, it's sort of, I remember reading this in a book, but they gave the example of racking a shotgun, in Vegas, in a casino. And you look at who actually turns around when they hear the noise. And the author was saying, don't play poker with those people, because they're the good ones. They're not the fish. So you don't want to play with them. So it's a similar thing here. You're racking the shotgun to identify who is actually interested in this. And that's how you narrow down your funnel. And then you actually spend more time with those people and nurture them, get in touch with them, build a relationship with them, and so on. That's the way that I've approached it, and it can work very, very well. But it's important that you actually test a lot of messages for that first message. So I've had campaigns, and the most recent one was actually to get new members for the Discord group that I run. We can put a link to that in the resources for the show. But the idea is that basically I send out 600 emails, and 300 with one message, 300 with the other. Through the 300 that I sent with the first message got 0 responses, except one guy who was angry and he was like, no. Then the second one that I sent out, 300 emails, got 60 responses, and everybody was ecstatic about it. I maybe had one who said no out of those 60 responses, and everybody else said yes, and they were interested. Some of them apologized for not getting back sooner. So you can have both types of experience, and that first message is really important. You need to craft that. We were talking about copywriting earlier. You need to craft that so that it's actually compelling and it understands the target audience. It joins the conversation that's already going on in their heads. Like, that's very important. You have to put yourself in the shoes of these people and into what they're already thinking, and join the conversation at that point. Then they don't feel like they're interrupted, because imagine like you're in a pub, right? Or in a bar, and you want to strike a conversation with someone or with a group of people. How do you do it? Well, you sort of listen to what they're talking about, and you find the good moment when you can butt in and join the conversation, right? And it's a similar thing here.
Okay. So I'm kind of, although I don't hear their conversation, I am going to approach a bunch of people who might be having that conversation. The ones that are having the conversation,
exactly,
will be like, oh, this is exactly what I'm interested in right now. And the ones who aren't will be like, okay,
yeah,
yet another annoying message. Okay.
That's what I say. And the other advice that I give, create an email account on a new domain, right? So if your main domain is Brooklyn Math Tutor, for example, then you probably want to get brooklynmathtutor.net if your main domain is .com. And then have the .net domain redirect to the .com one if they access it, but create the emails for the cold outreach on the .net one. And the reason for this is that in case, this shouldn't happen if you do it properly, but in case that your email and the domain get blacklisted, your main domain is not affected. So that's the one trick that I like to use.
You suggest that you mentioned before LinkedIn. Should I send emails or should I do LinkedIn?
Both of them can work. So I've used both methods. It depends how you can find tutors more easily. I suppose that LinkedIn for you is easier because you just search for their profile if they have tutor in it, and then that's an easy way to find a lot of people. Emails can be a bit more difficult. I suppose you would have to check out if they have websites maybe. Although, if they already have websites and stuff, they may be better leads to start off with. I don't know.
Or they may not need me.
Yeah.
Since I'm kind of like helping me out, let me ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah,
Does
sure.
the offer I'm making people make sense to kind of find people that are in this phase or in this mindset where they think, yeah, I'd like to partner up with someone. I don't want to deal with all this businessy stuff. I don't want to deal with all this technical stuff. I just want to like tutor or like manage, but I don't want to deal with all the setup. Because when you talk to business people, they're like, why the hell does this person need you? What value are they providing?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there is value because all these skills are not easy to acquire and not everyone has these interests. Okay.
Right. So I think that, the offer, so there's multiple things that you can test in your message. So one thing you can test is the offer, like what sort of proposal do you make to them and how do you actually approach them? Other things that you can test is if you're asking them to fill out a form if they're interested, or if you're asking just for a reply to the email. Generally, the way it works is that you want to set your the level of your ask. Because there's multiple levels, right? You can ask them to do something that's going to be very hard for them and they're not really going to want to do it. And then you're going to get very few responses or maybe even none. And you can also do the opposite, and you can ask them to do something that's very easy for them, but it's also at the same time not very meaningful to actually spotting and identifying the type of person that you're looking for. Then you're going to get a lot of answers, but they're not going to be relevant, and you'll waste your time with them. So you sort of have to strike a balance. You want to get the most relevant people to reply back to you, and you don't want to make it any harder than is necessary for them to do that. But at the same time, you also want to keep the tire kickers and so on out.
Gotcha. So maybe one way to do it would be to send out like 10 emails and then like iterate and see what kind of response, and then get 10 emails.
Exactly. So all the time, I generally test at least 2 to 5 different offers, let's say different angles, and then see which one works better. And the beauty of this is that you will keep improving them generally over time. So let's say that in the beginning, everything that you do is pretty much testing, and you can test 5 in one go. You test, let's say, 500 people, and you see whichever one performs the best. But over time, when you already get on a version which performs decently well, you can start testing different things, so you can have 70% or 80% of your emails going with your main email out, right? And then you can have the other 20% always going out with stuff that you are testing, right? So for example, you have your main email, but you want to test new headlines, and you'll always have 20% of your emails with a different headline. And then it's very easy to compare the sort of, in this case, open rates. You want more people to open the email to see what it's about. It's very easy to compare the open rates and see if the new headline is better than the old one.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to at some point give it a try, because I think that's definitely the next thing to do if I want to be scaling companies, as opposed to just like emailing the parents from the one company I already have over and over and over and kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that this is a quick way. Like and obviously you have the social skills and so on to actually do this effectively. So I think it's great for you. It's a great next step. And I would say that the biggest problem people have when they start doing outbound outreach initially is that they don't have the social skills, and then basically everybody they connect with is a fail. And it's a fail simply because they don't know how to interact with people, and they don't know who is actually a prospect for whatever they're doing, and they waste their time basically with people that are not actually interested, and so on. But I would say that most companies, out there are grown through some form of cold outreach. Mine was entirely through cold outreach. But there's a lot of companies that have been built this way, and I mean multi-million-dollar companies as well, where the basic form of outreach and the basic form of sales is the direct one, with the sales force and people calling potential clients, seeing if they can help them, and going off that. The other thing here is the mindset thing, right? So you need to have your mind in the right place. Like obviously this is about creating value for the other party as well. If you put yourself in the position where you think that you're reaching out to people who don't want your service and trying to force it on them, obviously I think that you're in the wrong sort of headspace, and then you may struggle because of that reason.
Is it reasonable to reach out when I don't really know what my offer is, because I'm not sure what people want? Like, should I have more of an idea of like exactly the kind of like structure I'm proposing before I talk to them?
I think you should go straight to talking with them. And the reason why is because this is the fastest way that you'll actually perfect your offer, by failing and trying it and seeing what happens. Like probably you noticed in your past, like if you look at your past, you mentioned that you've made a lot of mistakes, but those mistakes have actually been essential to actually getting to where you're at today. And we said that it's a process. So it's the same sort of thing here.
Gotcha. Okay. Now I need to find a VA to like be willing to send out emails. I guess that part is not hard.
Yeah, that part is not hard. If you also want somebody who is going to collect emails for you, there are services such as that. I can recommend a good person to you. I can, after our interview is over, I can send that to you. Right. So going back briefly, you also mentioned a bit earlier that if you were to start again, you would make sure that there is demand in your niche. So I wanted to ask you, how would you do that? How do you check if there is demand for something when you've never started before?
Are you talking about in my business in general?
Well, when we were discussing earlier, we discussed what you would do if you were to start from scratch again. Yeah. So you mentioned that one of the things is you would check that there is demand for it. Like, for example, you were lucky in math that there was demand, but if you chose Spanish, right, it wouldn't be the same story.
Yeah. Well, I think in tutoring, it's kind of easy because it's actually very clear. Like, as long as you have a customer focused perspective, if you're thinking, oh, I love ancient history, like I want to teach that, it's like nobody cares. Like it's very obvious if you just open your eyes at all, like what people need help with in tutoring, and it's like the stuff that's hard and cumulative, or the stuff that has a big impact. So you don't have to like actually really even experiment that much. You just have to be customer focused. Like people need help with test prep, people need help with a lot of test prep because there's tons of different tests, and they need help with math. They need some help with science, and then everything else is like much less. And in terms of demand, I think you should. How would I test it? Because the question is like, where do you live? And honestly, like, also, I'm lucky. I live in New York City, or I lived in New York City, and people here have money and they're willing to spend it. If you're living in, I don't know, almost anywhere else, I think it'd be much harder. And I honestly don't know what I would do. I'm not sure how I would do it. Maybe I'd have to do more social network. Maybe I'd actually go to like a library and say, hey, does anybody look for tutoring here? I'm not sure. I think your environment, or if you live in a different country, if you're not in the States, if you're in like former Soviet Union, people are super self-sufficient. Like they're not going to pay you to teach their kid like math. That's nuts. So at least most of them. Maybe I would see if there's already any kind of market, but it's hard to know, like that's why I think a lot of the step-by-step instructions don't work, because what worked for me in New York in 2007 and 8 is just not going to be what works for somebody today somewhere else.
I agree. You sort of have to figure it out. And I think that's the hard bit about business, the fact that you have that uncertainty and you sort of need to navigate it and find an answer that's going to work for you. And the funny thing is that answer is not eternal. It's something that works now for you.
Yeah. Principles stay, like social skills are essentially eternal, although they should be improved. But specific approaches to marketing, just so much demands where you are, what you're doing. I mean, anyone who says like, yeah, this is what you do, like I have no idea how they can honestly believe that like their approach will work for someone else.
I definitely agree with that. And I think it's been my experience as well, especially in marketing. It's so fast paced. Everything is changing all the time. There are some eternal, let's say, principles that there are in marketing, but the tactics, they change all the time. So I agree 100% on that.
The landscape changes all the time.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I also wanted to get at in the interview, and I like to ask all my guests, this question. Basically, what would you say that your top, when it comes to business or mindset, what would be your top book recommendations? A lot of the listeners are very interested in that.
Top book of it. Oh yeah, I have a couple that I one very good one was Good to Great. I think I mentioned that one several times. Another good one I read, which I kind of like, was this book called Company of One. Although maybe it's a little bit, it's so. If you want to start a company, it's kind of good to read it and realize you don't need to like work with tons of people or hire tons of people or make things big. There was a really good book by Keith Cunningham. This is one of my favorites.
Yeah. The road less traveled. Yeah.
No, The Road Less Stupid.
Oh yeah.
The Road Less Traveled.
You're right. Yeah.
is what he's basing it on. And that book, I think, had this very much like Nicholas Taleb like advice. It's just like, don't make dumb mistakes. But he talks about all the ways, or at least the types of ways that people make dumb mistakes, questions you should ask yourself. I felt that book was like really good. Just like he asks you to basically like think about these questions, and they're so powerful. Aside from that, those are kind of like the best ones in my current memory. But I think what you read has to be based on where you are. Like people like reading, like there's a common one was like the E-Myth Revisited. I think that's really good for starting entrepreneurs because I talk to people and it's like, oh yeah, like you should be reading like kind of like the beginner. I'm not being like condescending, but like people have these poor ideas that aren't connected to reality, and everyone has much of the same poor ideas. And books like E-Myth kind of cover that. This whole like, oh, I'm just going to hire someone to do all the stuff for me, and I'm going to sit back and watch my business grow. Like, yeah good luck.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I think that the books that you read should be connected with your journey. I find it a very powerful question to ask people, though, for their top 5, because generally, it sort of shows the road that they have been traveling, and it sort of showcases their progression. And I think that this is what most of the listeners find valuable as well.
Yeah. I don't think I gave you 5, but like I read other ones that, like, like what's his name? Ferris wrote 4 Hour Work Week. Like, I think anything that's very hyperbolic is perhaps not useful. I think maybe even better. I once wrote this, like my 1 or 2 Reddit posts. I wrote one that went totally viral, and it was about like avoiding like bad advice, which is like most do this advice. And I think if anything, it's not really what people should read. I think people should avoid reading success stories. This is my personal pet peeve. Like avoid reading everything was wonderful and now a millionaire success stories. Because they're so like, even if they're well meant, I think it makes people feel bad. And it also, it takes out so much of the like struggle. Cause I used to like, it's kind of like porn. You're like, oh, I want to read, how this guy went from 0 to like 10 million a month, while like sitting in his mom's basement. You're like, I want to know. And then you read it. This is the book, but there's a lot of like these. I think Tim Ferriss is like this. Like, oh, that sounds amazing. Then you're like, wait a minute, why can't I do it? Like I'm doing what this guy says, but somehow I'm not Tim Ferriss. And like, why isn't it working for me? So to anyone still listening, 2 hours in, avoid reading like toxic positive garbage that hides reality from you and doesn't show you what things are like. So and most interviews I find are very curated, not like this kind of interview, but like you read a lot of very curated stuff that if you look at it any depth, you're like, how did any of these things happen? Like, how did any of this happen? Anyway,
I think I agree with you. And I think that the problem is that people, especially as they get famous, they get all sorts of advisors who censure them, and they tell them that you must tell this story, exactly as we have rehearsed it now, not a different one. So every interview becomes an opportunity to actually repeat the same message over and over again.
Yeah, I think it's not even people who are famous. It's anyone who's like been successful. I've noticed there's some people who'll be like really honest, like this was really hard, this sucked, I was a loser, I was a moron, I made all these mistakes. Like mistakes are really useful to read, but I would say like success stories that like don't even understand why these people are successful are actually like a negative.
I agree. And I don't understand why people are so fascinated with them. Like you go on Reddit, for example, and you go on Our Entrepreneur or...
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And you see all those people, I made $10,000 in a month. And then they have so many likes on it. It's like, why does that matter? Why should anyone care that you made $10,000 in a month?
Well, it's very attractive. It makes you feel like maybe I can do it. Like if this guy in Reddit can do it, and then you read them, and it's very like, it reads like a press release. Most of them, not all of them, but and it's like, and then I opened a restaurant, blah blah. It's like, where did you get the money? Like where, like every single line is like, how did you do that? And I think reading like other people's success stories, maybe after a few, is something people shouldn't do. That's my anti-recommendation.
Yeah, I see. And I can definitely second that. I think that what's important is that you actually learn about the process. and the struggle that somebody goes through to build their business. And I mean, for any desire that you have, there is a price to pay. And you have to know what that price is. And the way I like to think about it, you have to be willing to pay it. Because the problem is when you sort of want something, but you're not willing to pay the price for it, then you find yourself procrastinating. Then you find yourself not moving forward, and basically not getting anywhere.
The other thing I think that the reason why these stories piss me off and why I think they're negative is because you're right. For anything you want, there's a price, and all of us have a different amount of money and resources and skills in the bank.
Yeah.
And just because someone was able to do, X from Y, I went from this to this, doesn't mean that you can. And in fact, you almost certainly can't replicate what they did or anything like it, because you don't have their resources, you don't have their skills, you have a different geography, you have a different everything. And it's never made clear, like, oh yeah, I have I went to Yale, I have thousands of connections, my daddy's rich. I mean, I'm overstating. I was able to get a loan. I have friends in the field. Like, nobody says this stuff. Nobody says it. It was, hey, it was set up for me. They're like, no, I worked real hard. It's like, sure. But like, what resources did you have coming in? Like, I was in my mom's basement, negative. On the other hand, I was in America and I'm pretty bright. Positive, right? Like, some people don't even have that. Like, what you have coming in really determines a lot of how things might go for you.
Yeah, man. I mean, it really does make a lot of sense. And I mean, success is something that in the end is your own personal journey. So there does come a point where, you can't have ready-made answers. That's the way that I look at it. Like, I've learned a lot from the experience of other people, from working with other people, from reading what they wrote, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, you have to make your own journey. Like, there's no book, for example, for myself that actually told me what to do. Like, I had to figure stuff out step by step.
Yeah.
Right. So I agree with all of this, and I think that it's been a fantastic discussion. So I wanted to give you an opportunity now, if there's any way for people to reach out to you. Would you like to provide that, a website, your YouTube channel, anything like that?
Absolutely.
Put it in the notes at the end.
Sure. I will put in the notes. Email me, Alex at Tutor Empire. I may even read the email. I do read my email. Please don't look at the website. It's like not even a halfway finished. It's not a good reflection of my skill at running my actual tutoring company. So yeah, Alex at Tutor Empire. If you Google Tutor Empire, or YouTube Tutor Empire, you'll find my YouTube channel as well.
That's fantastic. So any last thoughts, Alex?
Oh man, I could talk forever. So let's call it a day. Thank you for having me on.
That's perfect, Alex. Thank you as well for coming on then. Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
So for our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this, and stay tuned for the next episode. And until next time, keep growing your business and providing massive value to the world. Remember, you are the reason why we're all growing richer, our freedoms are expanding, and we're all living in greater prosperity. Till next time.